The Krell slavers thought she was just a stray animal. They saw a gentle cat woman, alone and defenseless. They threw her in a cage and laughed when they stole her silver ring. But they didn't know that ring was not just jewelry, it was a warning. It meant she belonged to a human. And by the time the heavy metal boots landed on their ship's hull, the slavers realized they hadn't caught a pet. They had just invited a monster to dinner. The trading station of Sector 9 was a very loud and dirty place. It smelled of oil, old metal, and alien spices. Thousands of different species walked through the narrow streets, buying and selling strange items. In the middle of this chaos walked Nala. She looked very different from the rough aliens around her. Nala was a felinoid, a cat-like species known for being gentle and beautiful. She had soft, spotted fur, large golden eyes, and ears that twitched at every sound. She moved gracefully through the crowd, holding a small basket of exotic fruits. She was humming a happy tune because she was excited to make dinner. She was not worried about danger because she felt safe. She believed that no one would dare to touch her, not when they knew who her partner was. But she made a mistake. She had walked too far from the ship, and she was all alone in a dark corner of the market. From the shadows, two pairs of cold, yellow eyes watched her. They belonged to the Krell, a nasty species of reptile slavers. Captain Vorg and his second-in-command stepped out into the light. They were huge, towering over the other travelers. Their skin was covered in thick, green scales, and they smelled like rotten eggs. Vorg licked his lips as he looked at Nala. He did not see a person, he only saw money. To the Krell, a felinoid was just a rare pet, something to be sold to rich buyers on distant planets. Vorg looked around and saw that Nala was alone. There was no owner, no guard, and no weapon. He grinned, showing his sharp teeth. He signaled his partner to move forward. Nala's ears went flat against her head. She smelled the Krell before she saw them. The scent of danger made her freeze. She turned around to run, but the big reptile blocked her path. She tried to speak, to tell them that she was not a stray animal, but the Krell did not care about words. Vorg pulled out a long, metal stun stick. It crackled with blue electricity. Nala hissed and showed her claws, trying to look brave. Vorg just laughed. It was a cruel, scratching sound. He swung the stick fast. It hit Nala's shoulder, and a painful shock went through her body. Her legs gave out, and she fell to the cold metal floor. The fruit from her basket rolled into the dirt, crushed by the heavy boots of the slavers. The world spun around Nala as they dragged her away. Her vision was blurry, but she could feel them throwing her into a rusty metal cage on the back of their transport hovercraft. The metal bars were cold. She tried to grab the bars and shake them, but her body was too weak from the shock. Vorg looked at her through the bars. He noticed something shining on her finger. It was a simple band of silver, clearly made by a craftsman from a different world. It was her wedding ring. To Nala, it was the most important thing she owned. It meant she was loved. It meant she was protected. Vorg reached through the bars and grabbed her hand roughly. Nala cried out in pain, but he yanked the ring off her finger. He held it up to the light and scoffed. He thought it was just a piece of trash jewelry. He put it in his pocket and banged on the cage with his fist to make her quiet. The hovercraft engine roared to life, lifting them off the ground. As the ship flew up toward space, leaving the market behind, Vorg felt very proud of himself. He calculated how many credits he would get for this cat woman. He had absolutely no idea what that silver ring meant. He did not know that by taking that ring, he had just signed his own death warrant. The Krell ship disappeared into the stars, completely unaware that a monster worse than them was about to wake up. Jack was deep inside the engine room of his starship, the Terran Fury. He was a human, a species that most aliens in this sector thought was just a myth. Humans came from a death world, a planet with high gravity, dangerous diseases, and constant war. Because of this, Jack was much denser and stronger than he looked. He wiped grease from his hands and checked the time. Nala was late. Nala was never late. She was a creature of habit, and she always came back before the station's artificial sun went down. A heavy feeling settled in Jack's stomach. It was a feeling he had not felt since his days as a soldier in the Galactic Wars. It was the intuition that something was very wrong. He grabbed his jacket and stepped out of the ship. The air on the station felt thin to him, and the gravity felt weak, but he moved with a heavy, purposeful stomping sound. He retraced Nala's steps to the market. The crowd had thinned out, and the stalls were closing. Jack's eyes scanned the ground like a predator tracking prey. He stopped near a dark corner of the fruit district. There, on the dirty metal floor, lay the woven basket he had bought for her. Beside it were the crushed remains of the sweet fruits she loved. Jack knelt down and touched the basket. It was still warm. He saw scuff marks on the floor, the sign of a struggle. He also smelled something vile, the sulfur scent of Krell reptiles. His jaw tightened so hard his teeth creaked. He stood up slowly. The worry in his chest vanished, replaced by a cold, burning rage. He did not run, he walked calmly toward the station security office, but his walk was terrifying. Other aliens instinctively moved out of his way, sensing the danger radiating from him. Inside the security office, two bored alien guards were playing a card game. They looked like large beetles with 4 arms. When Jack entered, they barely looked up. Jack asked to see the camera footage of the market. The head guard laughed, a clicking sound from his mandibles. He told Jack to go away and file a form that would take weeks to process. He called Nala a lost animal and told Jack to just buy a new one. That was the wrong thing to say. Jack didn't shout. He simply reached out and grabbed the thick steel edge of the security desk. With a low grunt, he squeezed. The steel groaned and twisted like soft clay under his fingers. The glass partition shattered from the pressure. The guards stopped laughing. Their eyes went wide with primal fear. They had never seen a biological creature bend spaceship-grade metal with bare hands. Trembling, the guard quickly pulled up the holographic screen. Jack watched the footage in silence. He saw the Krell slavers surround Nala. He saw the stun stick hit her. He watched her fall. But when he saw Captain Vorg rip the silver wedding ring from her finger, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jack's face became a mask of stone. He memorized the ship's registration number and the face of the Krell captain. He turned around and walked out. The guards were too scared to stop him. They whispered to each other, realizing too late that this was a Deathworlder. They frantically typed a warning into their system, but Jack was already gone. Back on his ship, Jack did not go to the bridge. He went to the cargo hold and placed his hand on a biometric scanner. A secret wall panel hissed open. Inside was not trading goods, but war gear. It was equipment illegal in 5 different star systems. Jack stripped off his mechanic's jumpsuit. He put on a black undersuit and began attaching plates of heavy combat armor. It was scarred and scratched from old battles. Finally, he reached for his weapon. It was not a laser gun like the aliens used. It was a kinetic rifle, a heavy weapon that fired solid metal slugs at supersonic speeds. It was a brutal, loud, and messy weapon designed to kill. Jack loaded a magazine with a sharp click. The mechanic was gone. The husband was gone. Only the soldier remained. He sat in the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. The Terran Fury roared, vibrating with power, and shot out of the dock to hunt down the Krell. Inside the belly of the Krell slave ship, the air was thick with misery. Dozens of alien prisoners sat in cramped cages, weeping for their lost families. But Nala did not cry. She sat with her back against the cold wall, clutching her empty finger where her ring used to be. An old, gray-skinned prisoner looked at her with pity, wondering why she had so much hope. Nala closed her eyes and focused. She could feel a faint vibration in the floor plates of the enemy ship. To anyone else, it was just the engine, but to a felinoid with sensitive senses, it was a heartbeat. She knew that rhythm. It was the aggressive, thumping roar of a Terran engine. She took a deep breath and prepared herself. She knew that the quiet was about to end and the storm was about to begin. On the command bridge, Captain Vorg was busy counting his potential profits. He relaxed in his large chair, drinking a mug of sour alien ale. Suddenly, the red alert siren began to scream. A sensor officer yelled that a vessel was approaching them at an impossible speed. Vorg looked at the main screen. It was a small, blocky ship with no energy shields, only thick armor plating. It looked primitive compared to the sleek Krell cruiser. Vorg laughed loud and hard. He thought it was a joke that such a tiny machine would try to attack a heavily armed slaver ship. He did not recognize the design. He ordered his gunners to vaporize the annoyance so they could get back to their dinner. The Krell gunners fired huge bolts of green plasma at the approaching ship. But the human ship did not move like a normal spacecraft. It did not glide gracefully. Instead, it jerked and twisted with violent bursts of speed. Jack was piloting the Terran Fury with the reflexes of a war veteran. He turned off the safety limiters on his engine. The ship spun through the vacuum of space, dodging the laser fire by mere inches. Inside the cockpit, Jack did not blink. His eyes were locked on the Krell engine exhaust. He did not fire his heavy guns because he could not risk hurting Nala. He had to do something much more dangerous. He had to catch them with his bare hands, ship to ship. Vorg's laughter died in his throat as the small ship got closer and closer. The Krell lasers were missing every shot. The human ship was moving too fast for their targeting computers to track. It was like trying to shoot a fly with a cannon. The Terran Fury flew right through the defensive fire, scorching its paint but keeping its hull intact. Jack pushed the throttle to the maximum. The G-force pressed him into his seat, but he fought against it. He aimed the nose of his ship directly at the Krell's cargo bay airlock. He was not asking for permission to dock. He was going to make his own door. A massive boom shook the entire Krell vessel. Metal screeched against metal as Jack fired heavy magnetic grappling hooks. The thick steel cables slammed into the slaver ship's hull, locking the two vessels together in a deadly embrace. The force of the impact knocked the Krell crew out of their chairs. Sparks flew from the control panels. Down in the prisoner hold, the cages rattled violently. The other prisoners screamed in terror, thinking the ship was crashing. Nala just opened her eyes and stood up. She smoothed her fur and looked toward the sealed airlock door. She heard the heavy, rhythmic clanking of magnetic boots walking on the hull outside. The beast had arrived, and there was nowhere left for the Krell to run. The hallway outside the airlock was filled with Krell soldiers. They stood nervously, pointing their laser rifles at the sealed door. They expected a team of space police or a rival gang to burst through. They were ready for a firefight. Suddenly, the sound of the cutting laser stopped. There was a moment of heavy silence. Then, a massive explosion blew the thick metal door inward. The heavy steel slab flew across the room like a piece of paper, crushing a supply crate against the far wall. Thick white smoke poured out of the human ship, filling the corridor instantly. The Krell soldiers could not see their own hands in front of their faces. They started firing blindly into the white fog, their green laser bolts flashing wildly. But they were shooting at nothing. The lights in the hallway suddenly shattered. Jack had shot out the power conduits. Total darkness swallowed the soldiers. Only the flashing red emergency lights remained, spinning around and making shadows dance on the walls. Then, the real noise began. It was not the zap of energy weapons that the aliens were used to. It was the deafening, thunderous bang 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 of a kinetic rifle. The sound was so loud it hurt their sensitive ears. Jack moved through the smoke like a nightmare. His helmet had thermal vision, so the darkness did not stop him. To him, the glowing heat signatures of the aliens stood out clearly. He walked forward, firing with perfect accuracy. He did not waste a single bullet. A large Krell warrior, brave but foolish, tried to charge at Jack. The alien was big, with sharp claws and thick scales. He lunged out of the smoke, aiming for Jack's throat. Jack did not even slow down. He dropped his rifle to its strap and caught the alien's arm in midair. The difference in strength was terrifying. Jack was from a high-gravity world, his muscles were dense and hard. He twisted the alien's arm with a sickening crunch and threw the heavy creature against the wall as if he weighed nothing. The other soldiers saw this and panicked. They realized their lasers were bouncing harmlessly off Jack's heavy armor plates. This was not a soldier, this was a tank in the shape of a man. Terror spread through the ship faster than the fire. The Krell were bullies who were used to hurting weak, defenseless villagers. They had never faced a predator. Jack moved from room to room, ripping locked doors off their hinges with his bare hands. The metal screeched and bent under his grip. He did not run, and he did not shout. He was completely silent, which made him even scarier. The surviving soldiers threw down their weapons and ran away. They locked themselves in storage closets and bathrooms, crying and shaking. They prayed that the monster would pass them by. Jack ignored the ones who surrendered. He was not there to kill everyone, he was clearing a straight path to the top of the ship. High above on the command bridge, Captain Vorg watched his security screens turn to static one by one. He screamed into his radio for a status report, but the only answer was the sound of his men screaming. His tail twitched nervously. He frantically typed a command into the ship's main computer, asking it to identify the attacker based on the armor design and fighting style. The computer processed the data for a few agonizing seconds. Then, a large red warning flashed on the screen: species detected, human. Vorg's blood ran cold. He stopped breathing. He remembered the old stories about humans. They were the Deathworlders, the unkillable monsters who never stopped hunting until they got what they wanted. Vorg looked at the sealed bridge door. He knew that thick steel would not hold. He had stolen a wife from the most dangerous creature in the galaxy, and now, that creature was knocking at his door. The heavy blast door to the command bridge did not slide open. Instead, it buckled inward with a terrible screeching noise. Jack had kicked the locking mechanism with enough force to shatter the hydraulic pistons. He stepped through the twisted metal frame, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He looked like a demon from an ancient legend. His armor was scorched black from laser fire, and smoke rose from his shoulders. He did not look at the trembling crew members who were hiding under their consoles. His eyes were locked on one thing only. In the center of the room, Captain Vorg stood behind Nala, using her as a shield. The giant reptile was shaking, sweat dripping down his green scales. He pressed a blaster pistol hard against Nala's temple, his finger twitching nervously on the trigger. The room was deadly silent. Jack stopped moving. He stood perfectly still, like a statue made of iron. He slowly reached up and pressed a button on his neck. His helmet retracted with a hiss, revealing his face. It was a human face, scarred and hard, with eyes that burned with a cold, blue fire. He looked at Vorg, and then he looked at Nala. Nala did not look scared anymore. She looked at her husband with total trust. She knew the rules of engagement. She knew exactly what Jack was waiting for. Vorg shouted at Jack to stay back, his voice cracking with fear. He waved his weapon, trying to look dangerous, but he was terrified of the predator standing before him. Jack spoke in a low, rumbling voice that vibrated through the floor. He told Vorg that he had made a fatal error. He pointed to the silver ring that Vorg had shoved into his pocket earlier. Jack took one slow step forward. Vorg panicked and screamed that he would shoot. That was the moment Nala had been waiting for. While Vorg was distracted by Jack's movement, she snapped her head back and sank her sharp teeth into the soft skin between Vorg's scales. It was a vicious bite. Vorg howled in pain and instinctively pulled his hand away from her head for just a fraction of a second. That was all the time a human soldier needed. Jack moved faster than the alien eyes could follow. He crossed the distance between them in a blur of motion. Before Vorg could aim his weapon again, Jack's hand was already wrapped around the alien's wrist. There was a sickening snap as Jack crushed the bones in Vorg's arm. The blaster fell uselessly to the floor. Jack did not stop there. He grabbed the massive reptile by the throat and lifted him into the air. Vorg kicked and clawed, but he could not break the human's grip. Jack slammed Vorg down onto the metal deck so hard that the floor plates dented. The fight was over before it even truly began. The captain lay groaning on the ground, defeated by raw, overwhelming power. The rest of the bridge crew watched in horror. They dropped their weapons instantly, raising their hands in total surrender. They did not want to be next. Jack ignored them. He stood over the defeated captain and reached into the alien's pocket. He pulled out the simple silver ring. He wiped a speck of blood off it and turned to Nala. The rage instantly vanished from his face. He was no longer the soldier, he was the husband. He gently took Nala's hand and slid the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. She buried her face in his chest, purring softly. Jack wrapped his arms around her, shielding her from the chaos of the room. He looked at the cowering aliens and gave them a cold glare that promised pain if they ever moved again. The beast had reclaimed his treasure. The violence on the bridge ended as quickly as it had begun. Jack took a deep breath, and the heavy tension in his shoulders finally relaxed. He turned his attention entirely to Nala, checking her arms and face for any injuries. His large, calloused hands were incredibly gentle as he inspected the red marks on her wrists where the shackles had been. She was bruised and shaken, but she was alive. She rubbed her cheek against his metal chest plate, purring loudly to let him know she was okay. For a moment, they ignored the destruction around them and just held on to each other. The terrifying soldier had vanished, replaced by a loving husband who was just relieved to have his family back. But the work was not quite finished. Jack turned to look at the defeated Krell crew. They flinched, expecting him to execute them. But Jack shook his head. He was not a butcher, he was a civilized man, and civilized men believed in justice. He ordered the trembling aliens to stand up. He marched them down to the prison hold at the bottom of the ship. It was a fitting punishment. Jack forced Captain Vorg and his cruel officers into the exact same filthy cages where they had kept their victims. The Krell slavers cried and begged, but Jack slammed the iron doors shut. He locked them in tight. Now, they would know exactly what it felt like to be trapped in the dark, waiting to be sold. It was a poetic justice that hurt them more than any beating. Jack then went to the other cells and broke the locks. Dozens of alien prisoners poured out, weeping with joy. They touched Jack's armor with gratitude, thanking the terrifying giant who had saved them. Jack guided them to the escape pods and the communication deck so they could call for help. He made sure the old alien who had spoken to Nala was safe. He told them that the galactic police were already on their way to pick up the trash he had left behind. The prisoners looked at the human with awe. They had heard stories about the monsters from Earth, but today they had seen a guardian angel. Before leaving the Krell ship, Jack returned to the captain's console one last time. He had a message to deliver. He hacked into the slaver's communication array and set it to broadcast on a wideband frequency. This signal would reach every pirate base, slave market, and criminal guild in the entire sector. He turned on the video camera. Jack did not shout or scream in the video. He stood calmly, with Nala standing proudly by his side. He lifted her hand to the camera, zooming in on the simple silver ring that was back on her finger. He spoke clearly, his voice cold and hard like steel. He told the galaxy that this ring was not just jewelry, it was a warning. He stated that if anyone, anywhere, ever touched a person wearing a Terran wedding ring, he would hunt them down. He promised that next time, he would not be so merciful. Jack ended the transmission and smashed the console so the Krell could not turn it off. The message was sent. The legend of the human and his wife would spread across the stars, striking fear into the hearts of bad men everywhere. Jack picked up Nala and carried her back to the Terran Fury. They undocked from the slaver's ship and drifted away into the silent vacuum of space. As they engaged the warp drive to go home, Nala looked out the window at the stars. She spun the silver ring on her finger and smiled. She knew that she was the safest woman in the universe. The human ship vanished into a streak of light, leaving the slavers alone in the dark to wait for their judgment.